It was the last night of the year, and the town of Willow Creek was bracing for something it had never seen before. The sky had turned a deep shade of gray, and the winds howled like a wild animal, rattling the windows of every home. It wasn't just any storm, it was the storm of the century. The rain fell in torrents, hitting the rooftops with a deafening roar. The town's streets were flooding, and the once quiet river had burst its banks, swallowing up fields and farms. The crops, which the farmers had worked so hard for all year, were disappearing under the water. Some homes were already starting to buckle under the pressure of the storm. People huddled together in their homes, watching the chaos unfold outside their windows. Fathers tried to calm their children, while mothers prayed for the storm to end. But no one knew how much longer they could hold on. Every minute felt like an eternity. The town's only hope, their food supplies, their homes, their livelihoods, was slipping away piece by piece into the storm. The town had always been small and close-knit, but now even the most hopeful of people were losing their faith. How could they survive this storm? Was there any hope left? Could anything or anyone stop the storm that seemed determined to destroy everything in its path? As the night grew darker, the question hung in the air. What could they do to survive? By late evening, the town hall had become the last place of refuge for the people of Willow Creek. The storm raged outside, but inside, the air was thick with tension. People crowded into the dimly lit room, looking to their leaders for guidance, but no one had an answer. "Do we just sit here and wait for the storm to pass?" One man shouted, his voice trembling with fear. "We're losing everything! We need a plan!" "I say we pray for a miracle." Another woman spoke up, her eyes red from crying. "Maybe the storm will pass if we all wish hard enough." The room fell silent for a moment as everyone pondered the thought. But then voices rose again, some skeptical, others desperate. "Miracles don't just happen," a man in the back muttered. "We need real solutions, not dreams." But as the debate continued, something strange seemed to hang in the air, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as powerless as they thought. Could it be true? Could a miracle really happen tonight? The storm outside seemed to answer with a howl, pushing harder against the walls of the town hall. The question grew louder in everyone's mind. Could they still be saved? Was there a miracle waiting for them? If only they believed. But in the end, who would take the first step toward faith? Who would dare to believe that hope could come from the unlikeliest of places? As the townspeople grew more frantic, a cold wind gusted through the open door, sending a chill down everyone's spine. The storm outside raged harder than ever, but in the midst of the chaos, the door creaked open. The crowd fell silent, turning toward the entrance. A mysterious figure stood there, cloaked in dark, weathered garments. Their faces were hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, but their presence seemed to command the room. The storm's howling winds couldn't touch them, as though they were wrapped in a force of their own. The room was still for a moment. Who was this stranger? Where did they come from? "Who are you?" someone asked, their voice filled with disbelief. The stranger stepped forward slowly, their voice calm yet firm, cutting through the tension like a quiet command. "You have one wish," they said, their words lingering in the air. "Use it wisely." A murmur swept through the crowd, a mix of confusion, wonder, and doubt. Was this truly a miracle? Or just some trick of the storm? The stranger didn't explain any further. They simply stood there, watching the townspeople with steady eyes, waiting. The crowd looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. Could they trust this figure? What would they wish for? With everything hanging in the balance, the stakes felt higher than ever before. The town had been given a choice, but the real question was, what would they do with the one chance they had left? The room was filled with whispers as the townspeople looked at one another, torn between two urgent needs. The stranger's voice broke through the noise again, this time with a solemn warning. "The wish can save you, the stranger said, their eyes scanning the crowd. But only one wish can be granted. You must decide what you truly need. The weight of their words hung heavy in the room. The storm outside pounded against the walls like a beast trying to break through, and the townspeople knew time was running out. One group of townsfolk quickly stepped forward, speaking with urgency. We need to stop the storm. If it keeps going, it will destroy everything. Our homes, our families, our future. We have to stop it now. Another group, equally determined, spoke with equal passion. We can't forget about the crops. The harvest is ruined, and without food, we'll starve. We need the crops to grow again, or we'll have nothing to survive on in the months to come. The town hall was filled with tension. Two groups, both with valid reasons, but each advocating for a different wish. Both needs were urgent, both vital. But there was only one wish. Which wish mattered more? Some tried to argue logically, others emotionally, but it was clear that no one was willing to back down. The stranger remained silent, watching, waiting. In the midst of the chaos, a cold silence fell over the room. It became clear that the decision wouldn't be easy. They were torn between two desperate hopes. How could they ever choose between saving the town from the storm or ensuring their survival for the year to come? And then, in the midst of the shouting and confusion, someone had an idea, something that could settle the matter or complicate things even further. As the storm raged outside, inside the town hall, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The air was thick with frustration and fear. The two groups, each convinced their wish was the most important, began to argue more fiercely. "Do you not understand?" one man shouted, his voice rising. "If the storm doesn't stop, there won't be anything left to save. Our homes will be gone, our families scattered. We need to stop it now." "No," a woman countered, her eyes wide with urgency. "If we don't have food, we won't survive the winter. The crops are the lifeblood of this town. Without them, we won't have anything for the months ahead. We can rebuild homes, but we can't rebuild food." The voices grew louder, until the room felt like it was shaking from the force of their argument. The townspeople were no longer just discussing. It had turned into a full-blown fight. Some even stood up, their hands clenched in frustration. "You don't get it. The storm is killing us now, but without crops, we'll die later," one person yelled. "Are you willing to risk everything now just for the future?" Another shouted back. The once peaceful town hall had turned into a battlefield of words, each person caught in the struggle to be heard, to have their needs recognized as the most pressing. In the corner of the room, an old man sat silently, watching the chaos unfold. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, filled with wisdom. He'd lived through many storms, both literal and metaphorical, but he had never seen the town so divided. Fights broke out, shoving matches and harsh words that echoed off the walls. The unity that once held this small town together seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of despair. How would they ever come to a decision before it was too late? The clock was ticking, and every second seemed to stretch longer than the last. The storm howled louder outside, a reminder of how little time they had left. In the midst of the chaos, a sudden thought struck one of the townsfolk, a strange, desperate hope that there might still be a way to settle the dispute. Could they find a way to choose, not through words or arguments, but through something simpler, something that might bring them together? But would they be able to see past their differences before the storm destroyed everything they held dear? As the townspeople continued to argue, their voices rising in anger, the stranger watched in silence. He had seen this kind of chaos before. People divided, overwhelmed by the weight of decisions that could determine their fate. But he knew there was a way out, a way to cut through the confusion. With a calm, almost eerie certainty, the stranger took a step forward. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. "Enough," he said, his voice steady but firm. "This town will never come to an agreement if you keep arguing like this. The decision is too big, too important for any of you to make in this state. So I offer a suggestion. The townspeople leaned in, eager for any solution. Was this stranger finally going to give them an answer? "Let your horse decide," the stranger said, his words hanging in the air like an odd, impossible idea. A stunned silence followed. The people exchanged confused glances. Was he serious? A horse? One person laughed nervously. "A horse? What does a horse have to do with this? This is about survival." Another shook their head in disbelief. "We can't leave such a big decision to an animal." But the stranger only nodded, unshaken by their disbelief. "Horses have been guiding humans for centuries. They know when to lead and when to follow. Perhaps it's time for you to trust in that." The room was silent again, the suggestion hanging heavy in the air. Could they really put their faith in a horse to make such a monumental choice? The storm outside howled louder, as if urging them to hurry. They didn't have much time, and the decision seemed impossible to make. Could an ordinary horse really make such an important decision? And yet, something about the stranger's words planted a seed of curiosity in the crowd. Could this be their miracle? A way to break the deadlock and save the town? As the townspeople whispered among themselves, wondering what to do, the stranger remained calm, waiting for them to decide whether they would trust in something as unexpected as a horse to guide their future. The tension in the room was palpable as two buckets were placed before the horse. One was filled with fresh hay, a symbol of the wish to restore the crops, while the other held a soft, glittering cloth representing the wish to end the storm and save the town. The air felt thick with anticipation, and every eye in the room was locked on the horse. The townspeople stood frozen, their breath caught in their throats. Could this simple creature really make the decision that had torn them apart for hours? Would it choose to save the town from the storm that threatened to swallow it whole? Or would it choose the promise of abundant crops, essential for the town's survival in the coming year? The horse, an ordinary creature with no grand title or power, stood in front of the buckets, its eyes scanning the two choices. It was clear to everyone that this moment was more important than any of them could have imagined. The room was completely silent, save for the soft sounds of the wind howling outside. The storm, which had been pounding relentlessly on the town, seemed to pause, almost as if it too was waiting for the horse's decision. The horse took a tentative step forward, its hooves gently tapping the floor. It lowered its head and sniffed the bucket with hay first, as though considering the crops. Then it turned toward the other bucket, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the soft cloth, as if weighing the storm's threat. The crowd leaned forward, some with hopeful eyes, others with desperate, anxious expressions. They were all clinging to this moment, this decision that would shape their fate. Finally, the horse made its choice. With a swift, deliberate motion, it nudged the bucket with the glittering cloth, sending it slightly forward. The crowd gasped, unsure of whether it was the right choice. Had the horse chosen to save the town or to focus on the future of their crops? The air was thick with uncertainty, but in that moment, something changed. The townspeople's hearts began to race. This simple act, this decision made by an ordinary horse, was now the spark of hope they had been waiting for. Would the storm end? Could the crops be saved in time? As the horse stood there, quietly content with its choice, the townspeople began to feel a strange sense of peace settle over them. Perhaps, just maybe, this was the sign they needed, an answer that they would not have found if they hadn't trusted the unexpected. The decision was made. Now, they would just have to wait and see if the miracle would unfold as promised. The room held its breath as the horse, standing before the two buckets, made its move. But to everyone's shock, the horse did not nudge one bucket forward. Instead, with a swift flick of its hooves, it knocked both buckets over. The hay spilled onto the floor, scattering in all directions. The soft cloth, representing the wish for the storm to end, was now crumpled and spread out, the glittering fabric slipping away with the rush of movement. A stunned silence fell over the room. The food was everywhere, and the town's last hope now seemed in chaos. The townspeople stared in disbelief. Had the horse just ruined everything? Their only chance at saving the town, or their crops, was slipping away in a mess of hay and cloth. Was this the horse's way of rejecting their choices? Or worse, had they waited too long, now doomed to lose both their wishes? The room was thick with confusion. Some people whispered in panic, their faces filled with fear and frustration. Others just stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. They had come so far, only to have their hopes dashed by a simple act from an ordinary horse. But then, something strange began to happen. The horse, after knocking over both buckets, simply stood there. It looked back at the people, its calm eyes seeming to search their faces. As the crowd settled into the unexpected silence, a strange feeling began to settle over them too. Was it really ruined? Or was there something more in this act than they had initially seen? One of the elders, a man who had been quiet throughout the argument, slowly stepped forward. His wrinkled face was thoughtful, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. I think the horse is showing us something," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The others turned to him, unsure of what he meant. The old man bent down, gathering the spilled hay and cloth together. He paused, looking at the mess, then at the horse, and a slow realization seemed to dawn on him. "What if," the elder continued, "the horse isn't choosing between the two? What if it's telling us that we need to stop dividing ourselves, stop arguing over what's most important and come together? Maybe the answer isn't in one wish or the other, but in how we act as a town." The room fell silent again, this time not in shock, but in thought. Could it be that the horse had done something far deeper than they realized? Had it knocked over the buckets to make them see something important? Could the real miracle lie not in choosing one wish, but in how the people of the town would come together? The tension shifted. The chaos of the moment gave way to a new understanding. Perhaps this was the key. Not a miracle chosen by one wish, but a chance for everyone to unite for the greater good. And just maybe that was the miracle they had all been waiting for. As the townspeople stood in stunned silence, the mysterious stranger stepped forward, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He looked down at the overturned buckets and then back at the people, who were still processing the horse's unexpected actions. "The horse has shown you the answer," the stranger said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You don't need to choose between one wish or the other. Combine your wishes." A wave of realization swept through the crowd. Could it be that simple? Could they really wish for both, the end of the storm and the healing of the land? The argument that had torn the town apart suddenly seemed insignificant. The townspeople exchanged looks of shock and then of understanding. They had been so focused on making the right choice between two vital needs that they had overlooked the possibility of having both. One by one, they began to nod, their faces lighting up with a new hope. They didn't have to pick. Together, they could ask for both blessings, to save their homes from the storm and restore the land to health for the future. But doubts lingered. Could they really have both? It felt almost too good to be true. For so long, they had struggled with fear and division, never imagining that the answer would come not through picking one wish, but through uniting their desires. The elder, who had first spoken up about the horse's actions, now stood tall. "We've been divided in our thinking, but if we combine our wishes, there's power in unity. We must all agree that we want both for the town and for the crops. Only then can we make the wish truly powerful." The townspeople huddled together, quickly discussing how they could word the wish. Their fears began to fade as the idea took shape. Perhaps this was what they had been waiting for all along. Not one miracle, but a unified wish that could change everything. Still, questions remained. Would the wish really work? Could they really save both the storm and the land? Could the horse's action and the stranger's suggestion lead to the miracle they had all been hoping for? As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the stranger nodded toward the horse, his eyes gleaming with a quiet certainty. "The answer is in your hands now," he said. With newfound clarity and hope, the townspeople gathered together to make their wish. The storm had not been their only enemy. Division had been. And now, together, they could face whatever came next, with a shared wish for a new beginning. The horse had shown them the way. And now, it was up to them to believe that the miracle they needed was within their reach. As the storm raged outside, the clock ticked down to the final moments of the year. The wind howled through the cracks in the town hall, and the sound of the rain pounding against the windows seemed to echo the growing tension inside. With only minutes before midnight, the pressure was building, and every heartbeat felt like it was racing against time. The townspeople stood in a circle, their faces tense with uncertainty. Their hands shook slightly as they gathered around, ready to make their combined wish. It was a wish for both the storm to end and the land to heal. But as the seconds ticked away, doubt began to creep into their minds. Had they made the right choice? Could they truly trust the strange, unspoken message the horse had delivered? Was the idea of combining their wishes too risky? Some of them had grown skeptical. After all, miracles didn't happen every day. Could a wish really change everything? The storm outside continued to roar, threatening to destroy everything they held dear, and the weight of the decision pressed heavily on their shoulders. And then, a few whispered voices rose in the back of the crowd, questioning whether it was worth it. They feared that the wish would fail, that they were hoping for too much. What if they had misunderstood the horse's actions? What if they were too late? But the stranger, standing off to the side, remained calm, his expression unreadable. He had never wavered in his belief that the townspeople could save themselves, and now, it seemed, the only thing left was for them to take a leap of faith. The horse had given them a sign, an answer they had been too blinded by fear to see before. "Trust the wish, and trust each other," the stranger said, his voice cutting through the rising uncertainty. "The horse has shown you the path forward, but now it is your belief that will make it happen." With no time to lose, the townspeople took a deep breath. The final moments before midnight felt like an eternity. Their hearts beat in unison, their hands trembling with both fear and hope. Together they closed their eyes and made their wish, one wish, shared by all, for the storm to end and the land to be healed. Outside, the storm seemed to grow louder, but inside, there was a quiet calm. The clock struck midnight. Would their wish work? Would the storm stop? Could the power of their unity, along with the horse's guidance, really change the course of the night? In the final breathless seconds, the town held its collective breath, waiting for the answer that would decide their fate. As the clock struck 12, the world seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, everything paused. Time, the storm, the doubts. The townspeople stood in complete silence, their eyes locked on the sky. Then, slowly, the wind began to die down. The howling storm that had battered the town all night started to fade, as if it had been a bad dream. The rain softened into a gentle drizzle before it stopped completely. The clouds that had been dark and menacing began to part, revealing a clear sky bathed in soft moonlight. It was as if the heavens themselves had opened up, sending a sign of hope. The townspeople couldn't believe their eyes. The storm was gone, and with it, the tension that had plagued them for hours seemed to lift from their shoulders. The wind, once furious and destructive, was now a whisper. The storm that had threatened to erase everything was no more. But the miracle didn't end with the weather. As the townspeople ventured outside, they noticed something extraordinary. In the fields, where once there had been nothing but flooded earth and damaged crops, new life was sprouting. Tiny green shoots broke through the soil, reaching toward the sky. It was a sign of rebirth, of renewal. The land that had been suffering was now healing, the promise of fresh growth on the horizon. A wave of disbelief washed over the crowd. Could it really be? Could this truly be the miracle they had wished for? Had the power of their shared wish and the mysterious horse's guidance truly made such a change? They looked back at the horse, who stood quietly nearby, as though it had always known that this would happen. Its calm eyes seemed to hold an understanding that went beyond words, as though it had been part of something much greater than anyone had realized. The stranger, who had been watching quietly, finally spoke. "It was not just the wish that saved you. It was your unity, your belief in one another, and the guidance you found in the simplest of things." The horse had been the catalyst, the one to show them the path forward, to make them see that they didn't need to choose between the storm and the crops. In the end, it wasn't just about one wish. It was about the power of coming together, trusting each other, and believing in the possibility of change. And as the townspeople stood in awe, witnessing the miracle before them, they realized that the magic of New Year's Eve was not just in the clearing skies or the crops returning to life. It was in the lesson they had learned, that no matter how impossible a situation seemed, hope, belief, and unity could always lead to a new beginning. Had it been the horse's magic? Maybe. Or maybe it had been the power of their own hearts coming together in the moment they needed it most. The midnight miracle had arrived, and it was more than they could have ever imagined. As the first light of dawn began to touch the townspeople gathered in the fields, marveling at the miracle that had unfolded before their eyes. The storm had vanished, and the crops had begun to heal. It was all too much to process, too perfect, too surreal. Everyone was filled with awe and gratitude, but there was one thing on their minds. They needed to thank the stranger. But when they turned to where the mysterious figure had stood, there was no one there. The stranger was gone, vanished without a trace. They searched the town, looking in every corner, in every shadow. They called out, hoping for an answer. But there was no sign of the person who had brought them hope, who had given them the chance to make a wish. It was as if the stranger had never existed at all. Confusion spread like wildfire. Who had that person been? Was it a dream? How had they arrived just when the town needed them most? And why had they chosen this small, struggling town? The questions hung in the air, unanswered. But as the townspeople stood together trying to make sense of it all, one thing became clear. The stranger had left them with something more valuable than any explanation. The lesson, the truth, was right in front of them. Miracles don't always come in the form of grand gestures or obvious solutions. Sometimes they arrive in the most unexpected ways, through a wish, through a horse, through the power of unity. And in that moment, the townspeople understood. The stranger hadn't needed to stay. They had given the town something much greater than a thank you. They had given them a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always hope. As the townspeople turned to the fields, they noticed something else. The horse, the quiet hero of the night, was standing near the town square, calm and content. The townspeople knew that no matter how strange or mysterious the events had been, they had all come together to change their future. They would never forget the lessons they had learned on that New Year's Eve. And as for the stranger, perhaps they had always been more than just a person. Maybe they were a symbol of the miracles that happen when you least expect them. As the sun rose on the first day of the new year, the town was alive with a sense of wonder and possibility. The storm had passed, the land was healing, and the air was filled with a renewed spirit. The townspeople gathered together in the town square, celebrating not just the arrival of the new year, but the miracle that had brought them all closer than ever before. The horse, once just an ordinary creature, stood proudly in the center of the square. No longer was it simply a farm animal or a tool for work. It had become a symbol of hope, wisdom, and courage. People approached it with a newfound respect, whispering words of gratitude and admiration. Some even placed wreaths of flowers around its neck, honoring it for making the choice that saved them all. The town's leaders, once divided by their differing wishes, now stood together, unified in the realization that sometimes the simplest of decisions can lead to extraordinary outcomes. They had learned that it wasn't just the wish that had saved them, but the power of unity, trust, and believing in the unexpected. As the town celebrated, the lessons of the night echoed in their hearts. They knew that they had been given a second chance, not just to survive, but to thrive. The horse's choice had taught them that sometimes, in the face of uncertainty, the answers are not always clear-cut. The key was to work together, to combine their hopes and dreams, and to trust that even the most unlikely heroes could lead them to greatness. The new year was no longer just about turning a page on the calendar. It was about the power of change, the strength of community, and the belief that miracles, big or small, could happen when they least expected it. And as the town danced, sang, and shared stories late into the night, they all understood one truth. It wasn't just the horse that had brought them together. It was their collective hope, their willingness to believe in something greater than themselves that had truly transformed their future. From that day forward, the horse would always be a reminder of what was possible when people united, and how even the smallest choices, like the choice of an ordinary horse, could change the course of destiny. It was, after all, a new year, a new beginning,